and welcome. Thanks for joining this Ignite Webcast. My name is Josh Topal, and I'm a Program Manager for Office 365. And Ignite events are a series of technical workshops for IT professionals and Microsoft partners. And the Ignite Webcast series will address different technical subjects and scenarios that are beneficial to anyone who wants to increase their knowledge of the Office 365 suite. So today we're happy to have Jeremy Chapman lead us as we discuss Office 365 deployment integration. And Jeremy Chapman is a Microsoft Senior Product Marketing Manager. And so this is a great and unique opportunity to hear straight from a Microsoft employee about Office 365 and learn more about what's coming for the product. So today's webcast will be about an hour, and we'll leave 10 to 15 minutes at the end to field questions from anyone on the call. We're recording today's session, and we'll have the slideshow and video available on the original blog posts and the Office 365 community blog post, as well as the YouTube channel. And I'm going to go ahead and paste those links right into the chat window. One last thing is, if you have a question, please feel free to type them in the text box on the lower left-hand side. I would advise that we wait till the end for that to make sure we reach everyone and get all the questions answered. But that's it for me. So, Jeremy, whenever you're ready, go ahead.
Excellent, and thanks for the intro, Josh. So, my name is Jeremy Chapman. I am a Senior Product Manager. I like to not use the word marketing in my title, to be honest, because I do a lot of automation, a lot of things that don't really constitute marketing in terms of scripting work, deployment automation, etc. So I'm going to go as deep as possible in terms of the content here and how to integrate click-to-run into common deployment practices with Office 365 ProPlus. We're going to go into how basically the click-to-run streaming process works, where the files reside, what the flat files look like, how to integrate it with things like Microsoft Deployment Toolkit, System Center Configuration Manager, Windows Intune, any other software distribution mechanisms you might be using. I will be showing things like registry keys that you can write, XML configurations, basically task sequences for MDT. So we're going to go fairly deep, fairly quickly, and I hope to leave about 10 minutes towards the end for any questions and answers you might have around these topics. And I see a few in the conversation pane. I'm running off of 3 monitors here while I'm doing this, so I can see quite a bit of information while I'm presenting and get my demos ready and whatnot on other screens. But I'll try to also be monitoring your conversation in the conversation window of links so that I can answer those things as quickly as possible. But please hold off until the last 10 minutes or so, 9 or 10:50-ish Pacific time, to answer and ask those questions. So let's get started. First thing that you need to know about the new Office and what we're trying to do with this version is enable you to be able to get Office faster. And that doesn't just constitute the install, which is markedly faster than it would have been in the Windows installer package-based days, where we had essentially at RTM you might install Office for about 7 to 10 minutes. As you get further on into the release cycle, where you've got things like service packs and updates, Office installs, then Service Pack 1 might install, then another 75 updates might install, and it's easily a 30-minute process or so before Office is fully installed. What we wanted to make sure we did with this release is to say, regardless of where you are in that life cycle of the product, we want to be able to stream Office to you. So I came from a Windows imaging background, and you think about how we release, say, a slipstreamed Windows SP1 image, where basically you have all the updates up to SP1 inside of that installation WIM file or install.wim. We want to be able to do that on a monthly cadence so that you can have Office plus all the updates in a single image very, very quickly. So, and from a deployment standpoint, all you're doing is determining what build version you want to actually push out, and then you can decide what you want to do with software updates. And we'll cover that as part of this as well in terms of the different update practices that you can configure and what your options are there, because there are quite a few ways to control the update. So kind of the first thing that I want to make sure we get out in the open is, you don't have to rely on user self-installation to get Office 365 ProPlus. It still streams from a local network deployment share or from Microsoft Deployment Toolkit or System Center Configuration Manager, if you have third-party software distribution, all of that works. The next thing is I want to make sure that we're aware of the two different installation options that we have, and there are two primary ones. We continue to do the MSI-based installation. MSI-based installation is basically everything carried over from Office 2010. So all the things that you're doing there with the Office customization tool, with if you are using a configuration XML file as part of your install, all of that is the same. The only real somewhat difference there is that we can now use AD-based activation for it, but it still uses multiple activation key or KMS-based activation. So all of that stuff still exists. There are a couple cases where you have to have it, MSI-based installation that is, RDS installs, so installing on a server that's got remote desktop session host or remote desktop services installed. You need to use the MSI-based package there. You should be using the MSI-based package for any Windows to Go-based installations, and where hardware-based licensing is a requirement, for example, shared computers, or in cases where you're on a completely closed network, if you're in the Defense Department and have, no outside portal whatsoever to the internet to do anything, you would have to use MSI-based installation because that allows you to use key management services as part of the activation story. With Click to Run, it's something that's built on application virtualization. It is still running as a local app. So the first misnomer that a lot of people have around Click to Run is that they think that I'm remoting into Office, or it's just a web app if I'm using this because it's got Office 365 in the title. No, we're just getting more elegant in terms of how we deliver the app. If you think about from a video streaming standpoint how that works, you can basically stream the first 5 minutes of a video and start watching it while you watch it. The rest of it streams in the background. We're kind of doing the same thing with applications. We're just getting smarter about how the bits get loaded on the machine. Once they're fully cached, there is no network bandwidth requirement in order to have connectivity back to wherever your install files are stored. So once you're fully cached, you are good to go, up and running, and from an internet connectivity standpoint, you can be offline with it and use it in an airplane. You can stay offline for 30 days if you go into a cave or on an oil drilling rig or on a cruise ship. All these different scenarios, or submarine, or wherever you're going, those Office installs will continue to work. On day 31, it will go into a reduced functionality mode if you can't connect to at least re-up the activation state against the activation service. Then it will go into reduced functionality mode and become a viewer, but assuming that you can connect to the internet at least once every 30 days, and the packet size to do the activation is tiny, it's just a GUID being passed up over the internet connection, it will activate your Office client again for another 30-day arming of that and continue to work. So in most cases, and most users and most machines do have at least one internet connection point within a 30-day period, and they shouldn't see the activation stuff whatsoever. From an IT pro standpoint, when you're delivering Office to users, it means that you're not pre-activating the bits for them when you install. You're basically installing and getting them to the point where they can sign in and attribute that activation to them. Why? Because we basically have, as a user, we've got 5 installations at our disposal if we buy Office 365 ProPlus. So that means that I can install on my managed computer that you might be provisioning on their behalf through your IT department. It also means that they would be able to have Office on 4 personally owned devices. What it does not mean, and another very common misnomer, is that these other 4 personally owned devices automatically get connectivity back to your data. That's not the case. When we have Office 365 ProPlus, and let's say the user installs at home, either on his PC or Mac, then that computer would still need access back to your files or wherever they're stored. You don't have to have a SharePoint Online or a SkyDrive or SkyDrive Pro instance running. In fact, you can block those things with root policy if you want to. You don't have to be using Exchange Online. You can use your own on-premises corporate managed Exchange services and wire those up to talk to the click-to-run installations just like you would any other MSI-based install. It's really up to you as to whether or not you want to allow data to go into their personally owned devices to be accessible via personally owned or home devices. So again, if I install on one of my 4 additional copies as an end user on my home PC, it does not automatically give it some kind of backdoor access to wherever data is stored. We do some things around roaming settings. Those are always file paths to files, so that doesn't mean that those file paths will resolve again from that home PC if he can't actually reach the file that's inside, say, your corporate managed SharePoint site. So a couple of things that I wanted to correct there in terms of perceptions that are out there around how the connectivity back to data works, and then the two install types. So from a click-to-run standpoint, all of click-to-run installation is using Office 365 as the activation service. So that means that any user who has a click-to-run based installation with Office 365 ProPlus needs the ability to at least sign in to a client service so that they can activate the product, and it basically puts a product ID or PID key onto that product, and from then on out, that product will continue to talk to the service to make sure that user is still active. If the user is deprovisioned, and this is a value of this service, if the user is deprovisioned, let's say he's let go from his company, quits Contoso and moves to Woodgrove Bank, these types of scenarios, then basically once he's deprovisioned in your directory, that will automatically deprovision him in the Cloud ID store, assuming you've got that set up to do that. Then his clients will, on his personal devices, go into reduced functionality because that is your asset. That's something that you would have paid for on your company's budget, and once that user leaves the company, then he won't have the rights to use your software, essentially. So I have the ability now, in terms of this bring your own device type of methodology, to actually deprovision users once they leave the organization, or I want to deprovision them for any other reason. So why click to run? What are we trying to do with the release? Basically, the main thing we're trying to achieve is to make sure that you're up and running as quickly as possible. And from a IT pro standpoint, if you think about how Windows imaging even works, a lot of times when you do a Windows image and you install Windows, say you're using MDT or System Center Configuration Manager and operating system deployment task sequences, Windows plus the updates for Windows are often much faster to install than Office. If you install Office plus all the service packs and updates that lead up into it being current, at least in our case with Microsoft IT, the Office install was clocking in around 25 to 30 minutes because it had to do 2010 plus Service Pack 1 plus 80 or so updates before we ported everything over to the new Office clients. Now you don't have to worry about that. So your imaging times even might go from a fully provisioned PC taking an hour to install the OS plus all the apps that you're layering on top to maybe going to 30 or 35 minutes because I've taken that Office installation time and reduced it down to the time it takes to basically cache the Office files or copy them onto the disk. Much, much faster than it had been in the past. We also wanted to make sure that with Click to Run, Office is usable online and offline. We're using the same code, the same binaries, everything that you're used to from MSI-based package. So if you say tested the customer preview or have installed the RTM version, build 4420.1017, you've got exactly the same apps, exactly the same features, exactly the same extensibility, all of that stuff as part of the click-to-run based installation. The other thing that we're doing that's huge in this case is the fact that we're actually breaking up the isolation model that AppV used to have over apps. So basically, and I see a question here from Ben in the conversation pane, we've actually taken this, we've added something called just-in-time virtualization that allows local add-ins, dependent apps, the files to interact with the Office installation just as it would if it's an MSI-based install. So we had a thing called Click to Run back in the 2010 days using a purer form of the old AppV 4.6 implementation that basically isolated Office from the other apps on the system. Now you don't have that isolation. Now Office can interact with local add-ins. It can interact with customizations. It can read everything in your app data folder and your user profile, so you know all the custom ribbons that were there on a previous install. All these things, whether you have to call into various Windows components, etc., that may have been isolated in the past, all work just like they would in the MSI. All the extensibility is there, and then we've added additional extensibility with Apps for Office as part of this release, shared between the MSI and the click-to-run based installs. So again, all the binaries, all the apps, all the stuff that you're used to from the MSI-based installation standpoint for Office Professional Plus 2013 is just there. The other thing that you get out of Click to Run is the fact that we can do background software updates. So I have the ability to control the updates, what build gets deployed out. If I update a build, I can also roll back to a previous version that I know was working. But the user doesn't see this. The user basically gets Office all cached in the background. The next time he closes and reopens Word or Excel or PowerPoint, all we're doing is essentially swapping symbolic or hard links between the older cache files to the newer cache files. So there is no lag or pending updates or any of those things. The update can cache completely in the background. The user simply closes and reopens their app, and they're up to date. Very cool stuff in terms of not making the user have to stop working to receive updates, and giving you a lot more control in terms of IT to be able to push those updates out without interrupting that user, the user getting any option whatsoever to not take those updates. It just makes it easier for the user to stay up to date, because a lot of times users do things to even try to, for example, pause any System Center updating activity or servicing, or do whatever they can to stop that type of activity, even remain offline in some cases if there's a compelling business need for them to do so. But now you have the ability to even control that simply by caching the updates in the background, and when they relaunch the app, it gets up to date. So in terms of update testing, we do not require you to take the default updates that are published to the service. So that's another common misnomer is, okay, well, once I sign up for the software as a service thing, does that mean that I automatically take all the updates as they're published, because Microsoft might break stuff and I want to make sure that all my add-ins and dependent apps and all the files continue to work, and I want to do some light testing between builds? That is still totally possible. There's a couple of ways to do that. I'll talk about that in the patching section towards the end of this presentation, but basically you have the ability to not use the default public updates and either update to your own server the builds that you've validated and tested, or you can disable updating altogether and just re-push a new installation. And all of these constellations, the cool thing is we're actually taking that installed version of Office, we're comparing it to the version that you're either updating to or reinstalling with, and we're only grabbing the Delta files. So the update traffic over the network is roughly the same as it would be if you're using WSUS or common update practices now from a networking perspective, but more elegant from an end user perspective. So I talked about this for a minute, but the application delivery, if we think about the way AppV works today and application virtualization in general, we deliver about 5% of the app, and then while we use some of the basic functionality, the other 95% comes in, and once it's down, it's isolated from other executables and processes on that machine. In the new Office context of that, we wanted to make sure that we did a couple of things. We wanted to break down that 95% block and make sure that we can actually load features based on usage. So while you're doing the first caching of Office, we're actually monitoring what the user's doing and then loading the features dynamically based on how he's using the product. By default, we put our initial caching muscle behind PowerPoint because that's your first getting started app if you go through out-of-box experience. But if the user decides to open Word and then he decides to use mail merge, we're going to put all of the caching muscle to that set of features that needs to be loaded. There are about 1,900 features in total that we enumerate and then load based on user usage and demand, and we can re-queue the way that Office gets loaded based on how they use it. Kind of like fast forwarding in a video stream, we were able to do that with our Office install. Once we're done and everything's loaded, we can see local applications that call Office processes. We can use add-ins, we can use customizations. We see all of the ribbon customizations, those things that were pre-installed if they were on a, say, Office 2007 or 2010 existing installation. All that stuff just carries forward. So from a user perspective, it's very easy to get trained. If I'm on a 2007 or a newer copy of Office that's got a ribbon user interface, it is very easy to go from an older version to a newer version. Sure, we've modernized it a bit, but the ribbon's basically the same, and we're going to pull in all of your add-ins, custom ribbon customizations, all those things directly from your user profile app data folder. So you'll see all the customization that you've done on, say, your Office 2007 or 2010 install manifest itself immediately on the new Office click to run install. And you also have the ability to do side-by-side installations of Office, which, as some of you will probably point out, you could do in the MSI days, but some things would happen in MSI, such as we would uninstall the old version of Outlook by default because you can't have two of those running. And our apps would then fight for default file associations every time you launched one version or the other, including a host of other things that are well documented in KB articles. We've actually optimized for side-by-side version support so that Outlook can run with an older version of Outlook. You can only have one open at a time, but you can have Outlook 2010 next to Outlook 2013. You can have, using Click to Run, you can have also Outlook 2007 running at the same time. And in both of those cases, we can even reuse the OST file, so the data file that is a deployment person's nightmare, having come from that background. What happens when I install a new version of Office? Typically, we rebuild the OST. If the OST file is 20 gigs, that's going to sometimes take a couple of weeks for that to get fully cached, depending on the network connectivity of that user. We can, if we want to, set a registry key to actually reuse that OST file on a 2007 or 2010 install so that we don't have to rebuild the OST. Because that network traffic might be more than, in a lot of cases, the actual Windows image plus all the Office bits that you're streaming. Office bits, as I'll show you in a minute, in terms of the flat files, are around a gigabyte or so in size, a little bit less than a gigabyte. But an OST file can literally bring your networks to its knees if you're doing 10,000 deployments over a weekend and you've got to recache 20 gigs of a mail inbox for all your users. This is real stuff that will help you save a lot of time in terms of getting Office fast again. So user training is better. Side-by-side version support, so I've always got a fallback in case I do detect any compatibility issues, and reuse of the OST file in terms of not having to rebuild that from scratch will help you get Office faster as well. So let me show you a quick demonstration of Office Click to Run installation, and for that I am going to show you a hosted install of Office. This is all basically in a hosted lab environment that has multiple machines running. I'll show just one Click to Run install, and I'll show how that compares to Office 2010, and I'll see if I can do 13 installs of Office using Click to Run in the time it takes me to do one 2010 install. So let's see if this works. We're going to start with a Click to Run installation, just to give you a rough idea of what that looks like. In my case, I'm actually having that go through an XML file, so it's reading the configurations I want to pass through it. That then is going to manifest itself into an installation screen, so I haven't done a completely silent install. I'm showing some display level here. I will show you settings in a minute to make this aspect even go away if you want to. Notice the progress. We're at 10% now. I'll go through the anatomy of the install and the streaming and what happens there, but right now, at about 10%, we'll have Office in a usable state on the system. So our start menu will populate here very quickly once we're a little bit more streamed into the process, and then we'll have the ability to run Office in less than a minute. There we go. And now I've actually got all my apps here. If I wanted to launch something, I could launch PowerPoint. It's streaming. It's giving me a progress. In our case, we will say no thanks, and I'm able to launch and run PowerPoint. So extremely quickly, under a minute, I was able to go from no version of Office on this machine installed whatsoever to having a working copy of PowerPoint running on the computer. I'll just go through the Office UBI experience. One important thing that we call out as part of UBI that we can, by the way, we can skip all this and I'll show you the reg keys in a few minutes on this. We do want to foster the behavior of people saving to a central location, which will give them the ability to use their files on other devices in Rome where they were last working, the files they've been working on. This is going to be probably one of the bigger behavioral changes in terms of getting people to use SkyDrive as opposed to your documents directory on a computer. So this is what enables you to roam from a PC, a tablet, a phone, etc. And again, this can be either SkyDrive Pro hosted or SkyDrive Pro on your premises using SharePoint on premises. So it doesn't mean that you have to have hosted data storage for this to work. So it means that it does mean, though, that that your device that connects to the data that you want to roam with has ability to reach all of those different data endpoints. So 10:25, roughly 2 minutes into the process, I'm fully cached. I'm not just installed, but I can take this computer, if it were a laptop or whatever, and go offline and go in an airplane and not worry about connecting back to the distribution point or the internet. Notice also, I'm not connected to the internet here, so I didn't even need to have an internet connection for it to stream. So there is no, it's not cloud-based Office as a lot of people tend to think it is or say it is. It's actually still a local install. It's still fully installed on the local file system. All of the executables, all the DLLs, all the stuff that constitute an application install are running locally on the machine, and in 2 minutes it was fully cached. In 1 minute or less, it was able to be launched. So let's show you what that looks like compared to an Office 2010 Service Pack 1 install. So we'll kick that off, and I'm going to erase that with the third link there on the right against the MSI package. So you'll see even on 2010, just getting to the Install Now button, it nearly takes as long, not quite as long, but nearly takes as long to get the Install Now button in the Catalyst installer user interface to show up and let me hit Install Now, and I will hit that, and then I will also hit Erase the MSI package. So now I've got an install of Office 2010 with Service Pack 1 going on, and I've also got my other 13 computers. So I'll go ahead and click into one of them just to show that I've only got one version of Office installed, Office 2003. We'll go ahead and launch Word as well, minimize that. Let's go back to our tile view, because not only can I install Office on these computers, even though they've got a pre-existing copy of Office without worrying about it, users can actually be working while the IT guys are installing Office on all of their computers. So if a user is needing to use Outlook 2007 or 2010, for example, while I'm installing, because they don't want to be interrupted with their work, and I don't have the ability to provision Office to them because it's their laptop and they take it home with them at night, I can still install Office in the background while they're using their older copy of Office, which is quite cool. So I don't have to worry about interrupting a user's workflow or day in order to get the new copy of Office. So now I've got all of my installs happening. We can compare that with our MSI. Basically, once we get to the white welcome to your new Office screen, as you can remember, we're pretty much usable. So these installs are mostly complete. And you'll see that by the time we complete all these installs, the MSI will be less than halfway on the progress bar, but anybody who installs Office for a living knows that once we get to the end, we actually install our Service Pack 1 plus any updates that we have in addition. So Office is really only about probably 30% complete on the MSI-based install. And now we're fully done. So within about 2 minutes, we're fully provisioned on 13 different clients. We'll go ahead and go to our one that had Word 2003 running and show that we can launch Word 2013 alongside that. It gives us our streaming message, and we'll be able to have, whoops, let me go 1 second. We'll be able to have both copies of Word running, the old 2003 running side by side, also with the newer, more updated version of Word. So hopefully that's powerful there, but that shows you how quickly the installation can happen. There are the two copies running side by side, no issues, no file association problems. It's going by default to the last installed copy of Office, and now I've got the ability, if a user does detect, say, something in Excel that, there's a compatibility issue for them, let's say an add-in or something isn't working as expected. Now we've done all the work possible to make sure that those things just continue to work, but in the odd case, it's usually 1 or 2 cases per, say, 10,000 files where they've got a thing that doesn't behave as expected. They can always go back to their Excel 2007 version and inform their IT department. We also have something called telemetry in this version of Office that will report that to you, and go back and fix that if you want. So that was just a brief showing of how much faster the install is and how much how much of a game changer it is compared to the MSI, which is still sitting there at about 50%. My install script also is using VG-Info to swap the desktop backgrounds out to show that there are 2 versions of Office running, but you get the picture. Super fast, about 2 or 3 minutes to install all 13 copies of Office, and that MSI will be chugging along for the next several minutes. Okay, so from a side-by-side perspective, it is not a panacea, silver bullet, however you want to call it. It's not something you want to use forever, whether it's Office or any other app. It is not a good idea to have multiple apps doing the same thing for a long period of time, so it's not something that we want to advocate as a perpetual or a permanent configuration, but as part of your transition, maybe for a pilot, maybe for 6 months, whatever, you can have both versions. And this, I've got a screen grab of Excel running side by side with the older version of Excel. The data-driven apps, probably Excel and Access, are going to be the most common ones that you're going to want to use for side by side. That means if you want to, and I would advocate this, on your older install, once you've got the new Office installed using Click to Run, I would probably remove things like PowerPoint 2003, Word 2003, and all of the apps that don't deal with data crunching, such as Access and Excel. Those are probably the only ones that you really need to leave around, because having 2 copies of PowerPoint on a system makes very little sense. But having 2 copies of Excel or Access, as I can attest, even coming from an IT background, is something that has been very desired for a long time, especially on the Access side. Having those. By the way, we support 2003 up to 2010 for side-by-side. There is nothing preventing you other than normal support of older than 2003 clients. We just don't test it because those are no longer in mainstream support. So in terms of the anatomy of the click-to-run installation process, here are some of the things to be aware of. You saw the install in the first one. Virtual file system is basically loaded in the first 10% of the progress bar, or the process, the red pop-up that we just saw, that window. That's basically doing the job of installing what would be equivalent to an application virtualization client agent that allows for a virtual file system and all of that stuff to be cached in. At that point, it's basically a file copy to get Office moved from wherever your deployment source is, whether it's the internet or whether it's your distribution point system center or whether it's your deployment server or USB drive or local file source, wherever you've got it. At that point, it copies from wherever it is to the virtual file system, the root directory, and the program files. That's when the streaming begins. At about 15% or so, I saw when I was launching the apps, it was around 23%. About 15% or so of the apps are usable. So at that point, you can actually start using them. One important note here as part of deployment automation that you have to be aware of is that the streaming service after 10%, which is called integratedoffice.exe, as a process moves to the system context. What does this mean? It means that the initiator of the process is not going to be the one that carries out the entire streaming of Office. That means that the system context of that computer that you're deploying to needs to be able to reach source for Office. So in that case, it would mean probably in your Active Directory environments to let machine objects talk to wherever that distribution point is for Office, wherever it's being kept. Or there are some other workarounds, and I'll show you that in a second with MDT. If you want to copy the install source to the local disk, stream from a local disk, then it ensures that the system can reach the install source and install from there. At about 15%, again, the apps can be launched. It's usually 2 minutes or less before the apps are usable, even from the internet, even from a fairly slow internet connection. 6 megabit per second is where we test at to be under that 2 minute or less first app launch timing. After that, caching happens for the rest of Office after it's basically launchable. So we typically cache for, let's say, 3 to 5 total minutes end to end from kicking off the install to being fully cached, depending on network connectivity as well. But on a fairly common, deployment environment where I'm installing via network share, distribution point, etc., local source, whatever it's going to be, sometimes less than 3, but 3 to 5 minutes typically to get that file copy to work. Of course, we're copying 900 megs or so of files, so it all depends on how fast your network is. At the final 10% or so of the installation, that's when we're finalizing. So we're installing the add-ins, we're doing SPP licensing calls, just basically doing the final customization components of Office, things like Power Pivot and those types of things in Excel. We're installing those components in at the last 10% or so. So if you ran this with, say, Process Monitor from System Internals, you'd be able to see all the different processes and how they're going. It generally follows this this flow. Let me show you what the installation of flat files look like, and for that, I'm just going to go into Windows Explorer and pull in a few folders just to show you what that looks like. Hold on. There we go. All right. So from an Office standpoint, really what you're downloading here, the Office Deployment Tool, and we'll demonstrate that in a few minutes, but basically you've got a setup, and you've got your Office folder. If you look at a MSI-based install, what you probably all are familiar with, you have all of the language-based folders. So here I've got ENUS only. And if I've got multiple languages, I'm going to have one for each and every language that I have there. So I might have Access, ESES, and JPJP, and those types of things, times all of these folders that have a language demarcation at the end of them, and then finally at the end is setup.exe, maybe a config file. The updates are kept in the updates folder if you've got them. So that's basically what an older install looks like. Now, if I look at the new one, I have my setup.exe. I've got a couple of XMLs here, and some of these are ones that I will elect to not use during this session, but basically these are ways to either download Office, configure it for installation or software updates, or the packager XML that I've built here is how to convert it to an app-v package. Inside the Office folder, we actually have the more important aspects of the package itself. This file here, the v32.cab, and I'll try to zoom in there. This file, the v32.cab, is actually the one that determines what build gets installed by default on your system. So right now we have on the Content Delivery Network through Office 365 and Customer Preview, we have build 4433.1507, and if I downloaded that, I'm going to overwrite this v32.cab wherever it is in the Office folder using our Office Deployment Tool, and that will then instruct what version gets installed by default. For software updates, it's the same thing. So our update service looks up to wherever your Office is being stored, whether it's the public internet and cloud for looking for updates or your private network. It interrogates that v32.cab if you don't specify a version. Based on that, assuming the newest one is the one that you've got there, it's going to then install what's in the v32.cab file. In this case, it's going to instruct, on mine in particular, build 4454.1505 to install if I don't dictate a version number in my XML. So if I go into the actual build itself, again, this is your Office install. So these are probably the most apples to apples comparisons in terms of the two different installer files. I have one main one, which is our x86.x-none.dat file. And this guy actually is the entire Office image. This is all of what constitutes Office in a language agnostic sense. The one on top of it, the enus.dat, is essentially the MUI pack, or the multilingual user interface pack for Office. This is where I can determine which language I want to install in the XML. I'll show you in a second what that XML is. But this is the language component. So instead of having all those folders for Access and Word and PowerPoint and all the different permutations of all the languages that you might have, you will always have one x-none.dat file that is language agnostic for whatever architecture you're installing, and then you will have the language-specific files that you decide to download. And I can dictate, I'll have, I think, 28 languages when we release available immediately, and I can put all 28 of them in the XML if we want, and I can have them sitting here as DAT files. Each one of these, though, I want to give you a context of how big they are. So the language agnostic x-none.dat file is about 800 megs. Now, one thing to to note is this actually contains what we call in beta timeframe the Mondo build of Office. So it's all of Office Professional Plus, all SKUs of Office, Visio, Project, etc. are in the same DAT file. And then the language files themselves are basically bolted on top or installed on top of the language agnostic DAT. That means that whatever version I'm throwing at that DAT file in terms of how I'm installing, I can install any number of different things. It means from a servicing perspective, you always have one source of truth because that one DAT file is like in Windows context, it's like the install.wim from a RTM or a SP1 slipstream image. It's got all of the different, like in Windows imaging, it's got all the different image indexes that you might want to install. On a server, there's like 10 of them. On a Windows 7 Ultimate disk, I think there's 6. It's kind of working like that, where I can basically have that one DAT file, and then based on what I tell it to do, it will install whatever version of Office I want it to install. And then based on the language DAT files on top of it, it will customize that to the language that I need to customize it to. So I want to show you that, and I also wanted to show you the program files directories, just so you can get an idea of how it actually looks installed. So if I go into Office, Microsoft Office 15, that's what the installed version looks like, and I'll go into my program files x86. I have a 32-bit copy of Office 2010 also on my machine. And if I go to the Office 14 folder to show that, here's what you're used to seeing, your Office 2010 with all the different XEs in it. When I go to the virtualized, click to run installation, I've got a bunch of stuff here that is new. And then if I go into the root directory, here's my virtual file system. This is, by the way, where we're replicating all of the components that would be otherwise shared that let us do isolation. So your common files and app data and program files shared, the common files and program files x86 and x64. All those are being basically replicated here to let you do isolation, the ones that we require to have for the virtual file system. I go back to the root. The comparable folder is the actual root Office 15 folder, which then looks just like the MSI. I mean, it's almost folder for folder the same. If I scroll down, and I'll just show a couple of executables here, but there's Excel, and in the same way, we'll see excel.exe and all the same, roughly the same files on the side with click to run. So this is basically showing what it looks like once everything is laid down on the system. So that was the installation and the installed files and what that looks like. From a managed deployment perspective, all you're doing is downloading Office bits, kind of like you would from the Volume License Service Center, customizing that with XML, and then putting that into your System Center Configuration Manager environment, and then layering on any customizations that you want. All that can be done completely on premises without using any internet connectivity or any user self-installation. Customization-wise, in the past we had the Office Customization Tool, Configuration XML, and Group Policy with Click to Run. That's for MSI. It's also available in MSI 2013 versions. In Click to Run, we only have Group Policy and Configuration XML. There is no Office Customization tool for install time preferences. If you want to enforce settings, you would be using Group Policy. Otherwise, you're using Configuration XML to do the main things, such as the version you want, the architecture you want to install, the language you want to install, update behavior, etc., and I'll show you that in a second. That then all it uses the Office Deployment Tool. Office Deployment Tool is a free download. It's available right now. If you go to the Download Center and search for Office Deployment Tool for Click to Run, you will see it. It lets you download the flat files for Office Click to Run. It lets you install, configure them for installation or for update, or remove the installations using the configure switch. It also lets you convert. AppV packages. So if you've got a Click to Run build, you can convert that for use with AppV. And if I've got enough time, I will show how all of that stuff works. But basically, it gives you all of that capability in terms of installing, removing, downloading, and converting packages for use with AppV. So let me show you a demonstration of this. And I have here my Office deployment tool, and basically what I want to do is I'm going to start an admin command prompt, and we're going to load where that Office deployment tool is. So here, I'll just copy the path so it's easier. Setup.exe, and we will see that what the Office deployment tool does. Hold on. Let me reshare my monitor because it looks like the sharing session had an error. Sorry about that, guys. Sorry for the interruption. So my Office deployment tool, again, we kind of went into that folder before, but there's the ODT folder. I'll save this question, Wayne, for the end of the session. For RDS terminal server environments, but yes, we do have an option there. Okay, so in terms of how this works, so with setup.exe, the Office deployment tool actually gives us download, configure, and packager. Let me just run the download command so you can see how I download a set of source files. So I'm just going to go ahead and use my download.xml file, and that will then hit the Office CDN, which is officecdn@microsoft.com. By the way, this PR here means it's hitting the Puerto Rico data center. That's the demarcation of where that is. Grabbing the files, and we can see we're downloading the v32.cab, which we interrogate to know which version to download, as I mentioned earlier. Then we can download whatever I've specified in the XML. So let me show you the XML that I have in download. So we'll go ahead and edit that guy. So in my XML, I basically have the products that I want to download. In my case, I've got ProPlus Retail, Visio Pro Retail, and Project Pro Retail. I can also have languages. If I want to specify the languages there, I can have multiple. I can have all 20 plus languages I want there, and eventually 30 plus languages. Here, because I'm downloading, I don't need to worry about the update path or any of that stuff. I don't need to worry about accepting EULA. All of these are properties that I will use at install time, but not for the download itself. This is basically telling me I want to download 32-bit. If optionally, I can put a version number in there if I want it. And then somebody's not seeing something. Can I get somebody else to confirm whether or not you're seeing information on your screen? Because I have the preview visible in my link client, but I want to make sure you guys can see it. Thank you. All right. So this is basically the command to do downloading. Now, likewise, after I'm done downloading, this one downloaded successfully, I can also use configuration XML in order to decide what gets installed. So here I have a kind of default configuration XML. I'll just full screen it so it's easier to see. But I have my source path of where it is. If I leave this blank, it will either first look for the Office source in the Office directory where I'm running setup.exe from by default. Secondarily, if that's not available and there's no source there at all, it's going to go to the Office 365 service and launch it from there. So if I have source path, I can manually dictate exactly where it goes. If I don't have it, it's going to look locally, and if it's not local, it's going to look to the cloud for install source. And it will still install the version that I want. So I've got a optional version property. I'll show you the properties in a second. If I want to install build 4433.1005, so that's the one I tested, I can do that here and specify a version property. I've got my architecture that I can decide what I want to install, my languages that I want to install, and also the product languages and IDs for other, like Visio Pro Retail there. And importantly, I can determine the update behavior. So here's where I have the ability to say I want to update it from my server location and not look to the cloud for automatic updates. So if I want to put updates and have it look to my server, I can do that here and add my own server UNC path or HTTP path for it to go to. I can also do silent installs with display level. I can determine where logs are being stored and determine activation behavior and how that works. So let me just close that one down. And then from the packager standpoint, it is roughly the same. So this is the one that converts packages into app.b, so I will edit that one as well. Same type of thing here. I've actually got a version number determined of which version I want. So here's the optional version property that we were showing you before. 4454, where the source path is. In my case, it's on the D drive, so again, I can use local drives to install from. I can use UNC paths, whatever I want to use, HTTP paths, all work, language, etc. And the conversion properties for app-v or for the configure property. I can also use the remove command to uninstall stuff. Let me close that down. Control 1. There we go. Let's close those down. And that's just a brief, quick show of the Office deployment tool. It's, how that works for running it with scripted setups. From a, let me unpin that so it comes up. From the options that we have, you can see we've got add, which will install. We've got the product ID, the source path we're installing from, the client edition, which is the bitness, the language, the version. All that stuff is configurable in the XML file. That's for download, for installing, add, remove, to uninstall, the product ID, the source path to install from. If we're downloading, the source path is where we're downloading to. The uninstall commands, you'll see that I have the ability to remove. So here on this side, I've got my remove product and product ID, language, etc. there, and I can also do the remove all property, which will remove everything, and that removes it. So I wanted to actually get to how I use MDT to deploy Office as well. So let me show you a demo of that. So I have a deployment workbench. Hopefully you guys are all using MDT. That was one of the tools that I worked on for a long, long time here. So here I'm in Microsoft Deployment Toolkit, and I've got a task sequence with Office. I've actually got Office imported in. It is my Office 365 ProPlus 4460. We'll go ahead and show properties of that guy that I have there. There's my app, my details, my install command if I want to use it, etc., etc. Now, what I want to actually show you, though, is because, again, going back to our previous point, that the actual system context process of integrated Office.exe is doing the streaming. In MDT, if you know MDT, it's actually doing permissions based on the initiator of the process. So let's say I haven't given the right permissions to a deployment share or deployment share on MDT to reach. So what I can do is copy the files locally. So we'll go ahead and show the properties of my task sequence for 4460, and then I'll show the actual thing running. But basically, I've used xcopy to copy everything into system drive deploy folder. So it's going to go into typically C deploy, but I don't want to use hard paths for obvious reasons. Applications, Microsoft Office 365 ProPlus, that's the folder I'm going to. For my xcopy command, it's going to copy everything with my E option, and then I'm going to, after that, install Office. So it's going to go from the same source, system drive deploy applications, and then read that configuration XML, using my setup command /configure and configuration XML. So I can't see all of that command line, unfortunately, but you get the idea. It's basically setup.exe /configure and then location of the configuration XML that I have in the command line. Now let's show you what that guy looks like actually running. So I have my let me toggle the full screen. I have my deployment share running, and I've got MDT on there. For that, I would always give in my username and password, which you guys won't be able to see, and domain, and click through that in order to start a Windows deployment. So we're going to go down to our task sequence for 4460 that we're just looking at on the deployment server, click through the defaults. We're not migrating any data. We're not restoring user settings. We're not going to capture an image. We're not going to enable BitLocker in this case, and we'll just hit begin. And through the magic of snapshotting, which I love and use all the time, I'm going to apply a Windows snapshot of the process, fast forwarded about 10 minutes. So let's go ahead and go to View and back to full screen mode. So now I'm in a running operating system of Windows, and it's carrying on the last parts of the deployment task sequence. There's a lot of content on ODT, by the way. I've blogged extensively on it, and Dan Brown from the TechNet team has also written quite a bit of stuff on it. there as well, by the way. So if you haven't looked at all this stuff, have a look for the Office 365 ProPlus Administrator Series. It's a bunch of blog content that I have. So my task sequence here will resume theoretically in a second as it's supplying the rest of my Windows image as well as Office. I want to see progress. Let me make sure. Hold on. This is always the fun part. I did test this prior to getting here, but since we're getting low on time, I'm in a sticky point. Oh, there we go. Full screen mode. So now I'm running action, that task sequence that copies Office 365 ProPlus to local disk, and then I'll be able to stream it. Also, let me just open up Windows Explorer so you can see what's going on in the background. I'm just going to go to C drive, program files. Now we have our Office 15 folder. There it is. That thing should populate as we install Office. Right now it's still caching, so it's caching from. I'll open another Explorer just so you can see what's going on in the background. I put it on the C deploy folder. Why did I put it on the C deploy folder, you ask? Because ZTI cleanup.wsf that runs at the end of the MDT-based installation is going to automatically delete the entire C deploy folder as part of that process. So I wouldn't say cheekily, but I've put that in the C deploy location because I know it'll get deleted later. If I wanted to be a little bit more cheeky, I could put it in the C MSO cache folder or system drive MSO cache folder, which is where Office 2010 stores all of its bits. And if you think of footprints and everything, you've got a full copy of Office typically for a 2007 or newer, all sitting in C MSO cache, even though it's a hidden folder. In our case, all of that stuff sits in the Program Files Microsoft Office 15 folder. If I go into my root again and show Office 15, all that stuff is there. So now I can start launching the exes if I want, and Office is fully installed. All right, so let's go back to our slides since we're kind of getting low on time. A couple of other helpful registry keys that you're going to need during the installation, and we will see that in a second once I click through first run. But after we're done installing, there will be this first run opt-in as to whether or not you want Microsoft to be able to see any issues that you have, telemetry issues with the install. You don't want users to see that typically, so you're going to want to kill this using the reg key, or you can kill it with group policy. The reg key is a little bit easier. You can also use HKLM to kill the first run experience, which is that video that users would see on their launch, because that's not a deployment setting. It's an Office setting that says when the user first runs Office. We're thinking of it as training, but the average deployment guy is going to want to kill it because it's noise for a user if you've already trained them, for example. So these are two reg keys that you would want to write. All right, so let's see what that looks like in a distribution using a normal software distribution mechanism. So here we've got Windows Intune. Process would be roughly the same for System Center Configuration Manager or other software distribution utilities. I'm going to try to get to questions. I'm almost at the end, so bear with me here for a second. I've loaded Office 365 ProPlus into my Windows Intune console. The great thing is I can load, if I want to, as little as just that Office deployment tool, setup.exe, and the XML files. So I can literally only use, if I want to, only use up about 460 kilobytes of space in my Intune environment, which by default has, I think, 2 gigs of space. So if I was to upload both flat file sets of click-to-run packages for 64 and 32-bit, I could effectively use up all of my storage there. In our case, I'm just going to use the 460 KB or so that I need to execute the setup.exe and the configuration file. That's then going to call the source from the Office CDN, the public cloud service, and install Office from there. So now I'm going to manage the deployment, publish it out to my users so they can go to my, in this case, to my Windows Intune store catalog. If it was System Center, I would be going to Software Center or the Application Store in 2012, or I could use it as a required package if I'm on System Center Configuration Manager 2007 or 2012, however I want to do it. all of those will work. Just anything that runs an elevated command will be able to install Office. All right, so now I'm in my user computer, and I'm going to open up my App Store on Windows Intune, which is going to show me the things that I can install. The user's not actually installing himself now. He's just telling Intune that he wants things to be installed for him when he selects what he wants to install. So I'm going to click on Office 365 ProPlus. I will see all of the instances that I have it installed on because all of these machines have an Intune agent running. And I'm going to click Install. And the cool thing about this is that basically Intune only has to download into its Intune cache the 462 kilobyte package, the tiny little package of just the setup and the XML file. After that, it can actually start streaming Office. So literally, I get the same type of 1 minute to first launch, 3 or 4 minutes to being fully cached installation experience. Whereas if I was to cache the entire package down to CCM cache with System Center or with Windows Intune cache, I'd have to transfer all 900 plus megabytes of stuff down to the local cache, then install from there. I can, if I want to, usurp that process and just have the setup file grab source from the cloud files where they're stored on our Office CDN, and I can also stipulate the version I want, update behavior, all that stuff that we saw earlier. So that was using software distribution with distribution point being in the cloud. I've blogged about this, by the way, if this is familiar, or if you want to read more about it. But that's basically how you would do that with System Center. And again, I can either have it cache all locally or use the cloud source. So we've got 3 different update options. I need to make sure I cover this. You can either update automatically from the cloud. That's the default one that we turn on. Or we can use that same daily running service to look at your own location that you specify, either a UNC or an HTTP path. Or you can stop the updating process altogether and just have it look at, or have it wait for another setup to run. In all 3 cases, we're just doing differential updating. We're looking at what's installed on the computer, then only installing the deltas on the system. A couple other useful things. The key to turn on verbose logging if you want to troubleshoot deployments. This one's very, very pertinent. Hopefully Josh will let you have all of the slide deck presentation material. I think he will. And the primary log that you're looking at is the integrateoffice.exe stream server log. All those asterisks denote other GUID stuff that will show up in that folder. So all of this, to conclude, it's trying to be fast, more controllable, minimal risk, because I got side-by-side and all my customizations coming automatically. More resources, Office Next blog, the Tech Center on TechNet, lots of great content. Daniel's a good contributor there, and Office 365 preview blog that will eventually be migrated to the non-preview production blog, but that's where you can see all of my blog content. So thank you for watching, and I know that we are a tad over, but appreciate you staying online, and if you've got any questions and have the time, please let me know. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Jeremy. That was a fantastic presentation.